Hello and welcome to this video on classes and object-oriented in Python. In this tutorial, we are going to learn about the key concepts and terminology of object-oriented programming and how to create custom objects using classes in Python. By the end of this video, you would be able to implement a simple library system as a coding challenge. Let's get started. To define a class in Python, you use the class keyword followed by the name of the class and a colon. Within the class, you can define a special method called init that is enclosed in two underscore characters. The init method is used to initialize the properties of the object when it is created. There is a special variable named self that we use as the first argument of class methods. Self refers to the object itself and is used to access the object's properties and methods. Let's take a look at this example. In this example, we define a class called dog which has two properties, name and breed. The init method is used to initialize these properties with values passed as arguments when an object of this class is created. In this case, we can create a new dog object by passing a name and a breed. Here I create an object named dog1 with the name Fido and breed golden retriever. We can add methods to the class to modify the state of the class or do some other functions. We call them instance methods because they can be called from an instance of the class. The first argument of the method should be self. Here is an example. In this example, we added method run to the class dog. So whenever we create an instance of this class, we can access the method from that instance. Let's run this code and we see the output of the method run. In addition to the init and instance method, you can also define class variables and methods. Class variables are variables that are shared by all instances of a class, while class methods are methods that are bound to the class and not the instance of the object. Class methods can be called by both class and object, but as we saw earlier, instance methods can only be called by objects. Let's see an example of class variable and class method. In this example, inside the class dog, we define a class variable species with the value mammal, which is shared by all instances of the class. We also define a class method bark. You see that we use @class method decorator to specify a class method. Now let's create two instances of these classes and check the class variable and class method from these objects. So I created two objects, dog1 and dog2, then print species from dog1 and species from dog2 and species from class dog, and calling the bark method from class dog. And here is the run. As you see, the class variable returned the mammal for all of the calls from objects or class and called the bark method from class itself. Now let's talk about inheritance. Inheritance is a mechanism that allows you to create a new class that inherits the properties and methods of an existing class. The new class is called a subclass and the existing class is called a superclass or parent class. This allows you to reuse existing code and avoid duplicating functionality. Here is an example based on the dog class we defined above. In this example, we create a new class golden retriever which inherits from the dog class. The golden retriever class now has all the properties and methods of the dog class, and we can also add new methods specific to golden retriever, which is the fetch method in this example. Now let's create an instance of this class and call its functions, calling the inherited method run and then calling the specific method fetch. As you see, we have two methods available for this instance, run that is inherited from the superclass and fetch which is specific to the golden retriever class. And let's run the code. The output of run method and the output of fetch method. Polymorphism is the ability of a function or method with the same name to work with multiple types of objects. Polymorphism lets us define methods with the same name in different classes. Here is an example. In this example, we created two classes named English and Spanish. We have a function named sayHello in these two classes which prints hello in their language. Then I create instances of these classes and put them in a list. We then create a for loop that iterates through a list of instances of those two languages. Inside the loop, we call the sayHello method, and at this point we don't care about the type of each instance but the name of the method we call. And here is the run of the program. In this coding challenge, you need to implement an application for a library to help manage some kinds of documents they have. Define class and subclasses to identify different types of documents, for example, books, dictionaries, magazines, and add appropriate properties such as title and page count, and methods such as getPageCount and print information to them. Then write a code that creates several instances of each class and add them to a list. Then iterate over the list items to print information and get the count of total pages of all documents. Use inheritance and polymorphism. Your output should look like this one. Here is the print information of the documents, and here is the total number of the pages for all documents. Please pause the video here and spend 10 to 15 minutes to complete this coding challenge. For the solution, first I create a class named document and initialize it with properties including title, page count, and year published. I also define two methods. One is getPageCount that returns the page count, and the other is printinfo that print the title, the page count, and year of publication. Then I have a class named book that inherits from document, and it has its specific method getSummary. Then another class that inherits from document named magazine, and it has its specific method updateTitle. Another class that inherits from book, which is dictionary class, and it has its specific method named search. In the main body of the application, I created 3 instances of book, 2 instances of magazine, and 1 instance of dictionary, and add all them to a list. Then I define a variable named allPageCount to track the count of all the pages. Inside this for loop, I go over all documents in the list. First, I call the printinfo method of the documents, and then get page count and add the page count of each document to the allPageCount variable. And at the end, I print all page counts. Let's run the code. And you see by calling printinfo, we get the information of all the document types. And finally, the all page counts. So we have covered the basics of defining classes and creating objects to some more advanced topics like inheritance and polymorphism. Remember that classes are blueprint for creating objects. They define a set of properties and behaviors that all the objects created from that class will have. Understanding the basics of classes and object-oriented programming will help you to write better, more organized, and more maintainable code. In the next video, I'm going to teach about working with files in Python. See you then.